Yeah.
Hello and welcome to the skating lesson. I'm thrilled to be joined by three of my favorite reporters, Phil Hersh, Maya Bagriantseva, and Christine Brennan. Welcome to the skating lesson.
Nice to be here. Happy New Year to everybody.
Yes, Happy New Year. Well, it's another Olympic year is upon us. So I wanted to gather you together for a little bit of a Meet the Olympic Press conversation. And as we start this Olympic year, I kind of wanted to ask each of you, what do you think the biggest stories are that you're paying attention to in the Olympic sports world as a whole?
Go ahead, Chris, you start.
Well, thanks. Great to see everyone. And, Phil and I have done this a long time, and I'm thrilled that we're still able to be colleagues and, of course, dear friends. And thanks for getting us all together. Of course, Maya, great to see you as well. And Dave, thank you. It's an Olympic year. It's a summer Olympic year, which, of course, does not include figure skating unless they're awarding the medals from the 2022 team figure skating competition at the Paris Olympics, which certainly is a possibility if it's not Russia on top. If Russia does get a chance to keep that medal, the whole Kamila Valieva thing, I'm sure we're going to talk more about it. But if that's the case, there's no way on earth that the IOC and the ISU and anyone would allow the Russians to be on top of the medal stand during the Paris Olympics. But of course, it would be a wonderful and fitting opportunity for those athletes who've been waiting, US, Japan, potentially Canada. It would be an amazing opportunity to have them be honored in that forum at an Olympic Games. That's certainly, other than that, it's Summer Olympics. And of course, certainly focusing on people like Katie Ledecky and Simone Biles, born 3 days apart in 1997. And obviously the two biggest names going into those Paris Olympics as veterans and as multiple gold medalists, different storylines there. And then I think just in general, of course, for my purpose, the obviously the allegations of sexual abuse in the sport and the issues of Safe Sport Canada, Safe Sport US, et cetera. Obviously that's very important, paramount in my what I've been working on, and I will continue to do that because I think that story is so important and so undercovered. And sports have basically, especially like figure skating, has just I think it runs rampant. The abuse is terrible, and from what I'm hearing, and I will do my best to stay on it, as I know others will also.
How about you, Mai?
First of all, hi from Kaunas. I'm here at the European Championship of Figure Skating. And sorry for my outfit. I just came back from the arena and it's freezing cold in the room. So let's say I'm truly representing winter sports here today.
Yes, it's great to see you. Yeah.
For me, the coming year is still about whether Russia is allowed back and on what terms, obviously. And what if Russia does not agree to come back? We'll talk about that a little bit later, hopefully. So for me, I don't know if it's the biggest topic for everybody in the world. For me, being Russian, it's definitely number one.
How about you, Phil?
Well, France has got a huge hero of its own in the swimmer Léon Marchand, who broke Michael Phelps' last individual record last summer at the World Championships, and he will be their sort of all-consuming individual story, I think. But from looking at it from the United States standpoint, it's been a disastrous last 2 or 3 Olympics for NBC's ratings. There are two schools of thought. Some people think that Paris, by just being Paris, people are going to want to look at events being held in all of these iconic locations, and they will tune in for that, particularly the opening ceremony on the Seine, if it comes off as expected. Then the other theory, and I'm not quite as carried away by the idea that just being Paris will draw people in. It's not like Beijing was in 2008 when not a lot of people had been to Beijing. And I'm not, this is sounding elitist, but please don't take it that way. A lot of people have been to Paris. It's not like Paris is a totally foreign place to them. The other thing is NBC is going to be dealing with, actually, everybody keeps saying, yeah, it's not the Asian time zone. It's my contention that this time zone is worse because there are no live events in prime time. With a 6-hour time difference from New York, unless you're having an event going on at 2 a.m, it's not going to be in prime time or even close to prime time New York. So I know obviously that prime time is an old metric in the media world, and TikTok views and other social media views and streaming and all will count. I'm very curious to see what happens here, particularly given that the next Winter Olympics is in the same time zone.
Yeah.
It's a great
You know, Phil, I think we're going to make news right off the bat by I'm agreeing with you. Teasing, of course. We agree on many, many things. We've had some really great arguments on many continents at Olympic Games, which have been also just from love and passion, of course. But absolutely. And of course, this isn't our mother's or our father's Olympic Games anymore. You know, I can remember in '76 racing home. And if you got home at 8:15 Eastern time, I was in the suburbs of Toledo, Ohio, ABC would start at 8 o'clock and those 15 minutes were gone forever. It sounds unbelievable now to hear that, but you had to sit there and watch from 8 to 11. And I did because I loved it so much. And I know, Phil, growing up, you loved it as well. I mean, obviously all of us did, but back in the day, there was, you know, there was no social media. Now, hey, there's someone, you know, in Times Square. Hey, did Katie Ledecky win the 800? Oh, yep, she won it. Did Simone Biles win the balance? Yep. Okay. Got that and move right on. You don't even have to, or you can wait and see it on, you know, on social media, on Twitter, X, whatever it's called, Instagram, et cetera. So I think it's a huge problem. And you're absolutely right about the time zone. The time zone is terrible. It was better in Asia. And also, Maya, your point is a really good one about Russia. I think the two major news stories that are not necessarily sports related in the arena, I don't know what you guys think. One is the Russian quote unquote ban and who's allowed, who isn't. And then number two is security, as always. Phil, you and I know that. Security, all those athletes going down the Seine, all the other things that involve an Olympics, they'll be busting out after the last two COVID Olympics. But the security in Paris, especially with what's going on in Israel, Hamas, and Gaza, my goodness, it's going to be front and center. Security will be every step of the way.
Well, obviously the Olympics are $1 billion business. How important is Russia to that business? You know, do you think it's financially sustainable if Russia isn't there for the Olympic Games? And how important is Russia for the ratings?
I
I would
don't
love to hear, okay, I would love to hear your point of view here because it's interesting.
I don't, you know, we're long past the Cold War days when that was what was sold, the battle between good and evil. Now it's hard to know which side is which a lot of the times. So that paradigm doesn't hold anymore. I think that there's been so much controversy about Russian athletes and doping that, you know, we just had a national football championship game here in the United States in which one of the team's head coaches was suspended for half the season, and it still got a phenomenal rating. So I'm not sure that's actually as relevant as I'd like it to be, but I think that people are going to still watch, but they're not necessarily going to watch to say, I hope that Russian loses the way they used to during the Cold War. I think they're just going to watch more out of curiosity. To me, this is going to be more than ever the Simone Biles Olympics because because gymnastics is an ongoing story. And the same is true, obviously, in swimming with Katie, and the same will be true to some degree in track and field with Noah Lyles. They go on for a week and you can make sort of a mini series out of them. So I don't suspect that NBC is going to do gigantic amounts of stuff with Russia. And for the people who aren't as invested in what's going on in the Olympic world, I think that it will be a non-issue to some degree. In the Olympic world, however, it will certainly not be a non-issue.
Mm-hmm. How about Maya, Christine? You know, what do you think about Russia? Russia isn't there, because I think in figure skating, you know, the air has kind of gone out of the balloon a bit. Without Russia, there's not the same level of competition or excitement or drama or all of the things that come, you know, with really strong competition.
Maya, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's, you know, the big difference between Summer Olympics and Winter Olympics. So if we're talking Winter Olympics, then Russia's absence would be noticed way more in comparison to Summer Olympics. I don't know. My question to Phil and Christine is, who is Simone Biles of the Winter Olympics? Who would bring audience, US, Canadian audience to the screens if we're talking about Winter Olympics?
Well, in the US, it's Michaela Schifrin, particularly after what happened to her in Beijing. But again, it's hard to sell a skier And it's going to even be harder to sell a skier. Fortunately, in those cases, events that are on, again, you're going to deal with a horrible time zone, except on the weekends. So, yeah, I agree with you, Dave. I wrote a column about this not long ago. Just talking about, without the Russians gone, has skating regressed? Has it regressed to the mean, or has it just regressed? And I think figure skating has regressed without them. And I'm really torn about this because I believe that what they've done in Ukraine justifies a ban, but I don't, on the other side of it, I'm not sure it's good for the sport.
Right. Well, we're old enough, all of us, to remember Vancouver in 2010 when the Russians were shut out of the gold medals, right? That was when Evan Lysacek, who of course fell covered since he was, did his first single axel, I think, in Chicago, was able to win the gold and beat Plushenko and so anyway, and then of course Russia geared up, as often happens with many countries when they have a poor showing in a certain sport, and they just throw themselves into whatever. And of course, in the case of Sochi, there was the doping. I'm not saying that, who knows, who was, I mean, we know there were a lot of athletes, whether it was the skaters, there was never any, I guess some allegations, but never any proof on that. But all of a sudden they come back in Sochi, which makes perfect sense, a home Olympics for Russia.
Olympics, yeah.
Right. And have a fantastic skating Olympics. So I guess what I'm saying, they ebb and flow. But to Phil's earlier point, and I'm sure we all, everyone watching us understands this, television and the way we consume news, sports in general, entertainment, has changed dramatically from, say, 2010 to 2014, as in the time frame I was just talking about, to now. My goodness, it's changed dramatically from the start of the pandemic to now. And really from the last quote unquote normal Winter Olympics, which was 2018 in South Korea, to now. And so it's, I think the idea, those old Cold War days, Phil, you're right, long gone. I do think there is some pent up anger and hatred discussed with Russia because of Ukraine. There's a lot of that in the United States. Now, whether it then translates when you're watching a sports competition, I think with Paris, it's going to be crystal clear that they're just part of this, unnamed team. And I don't think they're not going to get away, as I understand it, with any red, white, and blue, any little secret Russian stuff. It's going to be a very small contingent, no teams. So there's going to be, I think, it's the Russian impact is even going to be less. And then I think that'll make most of the American viewers happy, but we will still be able to identify someone if they're from, of course, Russia, and then have that conversation. But I think very quickly in an Olympics, stories start to build. Summer Olympic swimming is just dominant that first week, which is why I love covering it. Just medals everywhere, right? And not just US, you're right. At France, Phil, there's so many incredible storylines that all of a sudden I'm missing Russian. Well, okay, that's an hour ago, which is a lifetime in an Olympic news cycle.
Maya, what do you think? You're much closer to this than we are.
I think it's very important to understand that the discussion outside of Russia, in the West, let's call it this way, is if Russia is allowed back, what if how many neutral athletes are we going to see in Paris? But the discussion inside of Russia is so much different. It's more of, if we're going to go, we are not sure if we're going to accept the invitation because the terms of the International Olympic Committee are unacceptable for us. For us, I mean, for the country. It's humiliating. It's almost impossible to shine with a medal after that because, in those conditions, you're not allowed to be associated with anything state-sponsored, even after the Olympics. So if you fly back home and somebody greets you with a flag, that's already a risk, right? So we have more and more federations saying that, even if we are allowed as neutral, we're not going to, because you have to always bear that in mind. I'm sure that you know that, but not many viewers understand that. Sport is 100% state funded in Russia. So for the government, for the country, it doesn't make much sense to send a neutral team, which cannot, associate itself with the flag or with the state, and then bring some neutral medals home. It's easier to say, oh, no, thank you. We're fine without those Olympic medals. We're having our friendship games or whatever they are organizing back home to compensate First of all, financially, because now everybody will have a chance to get an equal Olympic compensation, which is, we're talking about money now, right? Which is pretty high in Russia. I know that it doesn't happen in all the other countries, but when you go back with the Olympic gold, you immediately get an apartment, a car, lots of money on your bank account. And what they're going to do now is that they say, okay, you just stay at home and you will receive absolutely the same. Actually even better, because with zero foreign competition, your medal is just right at your hand. So for many athletes, it will be, some of them in private conversations say that we would love to come, but it's not us to decide, it's the federations, and lots of federations already said that neutral status, not good enough for us. Skiing, gymnastics. So I doubt that there will be a number of neutral athletes with the Russian background in Paris or in Milan, but let's see, that's also in like 2.5 years. So I don't think that we will see many. Tennis players, maybe wrestling, judo, but it will be like less than I have fingers on my hand.
One of the things that's happened in their absence, and take from let's start from 2014 to 2018. By the time we got to the 2018 Olympics, we all knew who Yevgenia Medvedeva was. We all knew who Alina Zagitova was. She came along much closer to the Olympics than obviously than Yevgenia did. Leading to 2022, we all knew who those women were, and the pairs teams and the dance team. So there's some degree of expectation now outside of Russia. I don't think, and outside of the individual people who follow the individual sports in which Russian athletes are still sort of competing, I don't think anybody knows the names of any Russian athletes. And as we get closer to Milan, for instance, if they're out of next year's World Figure Skating Championships too, there'll be no track record. So, and that's kind of interesting. There'll be no sort of, can anybody, prior to Alina emerging on the scene, it was, can anybody beat Yevgenia? Then, of course, going to Beijing, can anybody beat Valieva with all those quads? And there was something set up. Now there's no knowledge about anything about them. And that's kind of interesting, particularly, and it's not just, we just look at figure skating and maybe a couple of other sports in the winter, but biathlon is a huge medal winner for the Russians. Cross-country skiing is a huge medal winner.
Cross-country skiing is, the place where Russia is probably missed, if we're talking about like the competition-wise, is missed more than in figure skating.
But so if they do come back at the last minute, it's not, you won't have that same sort of, there'll be a little bit among the real people who really follow a sport. I mean, are we going to see this year's Russian national champion? Will she be the leading woman? Will Valieva, who has struggled to hang on, will she somehow come back and make the Olympic team again? Who knows? But I mean, it won't be that same anticipation that we've had. And one of the things that points that Christine made, a point that I made during the last Olympics, was the whole doping program at Sochi emerged from the no medals in figure skating. I took it back. It started in 2007 when Russia was awarded the games. And even at that point, Putin wanted to make sure they were a great success competitively. And then the wipeout in Vancouver for figure skating, that's what you can really, you can just track the steps of the Russian dominance in figure skating, starting from the 2007, getting the games, going through Vancouver and then going forward.
Well, and I think, it could sound like, and it does, and I know Phil, I get criticized, oh, you're the American who's criticizing the Russians, right? You're focusing on the Russians when your country gave us, well, these are my words, the worst his and her cheaters in sports history, Lance Armstrong and Marion Jones. Absolutely. There's a huge difference, however, and I do think sometimes it's important to just remind people, obviously we all know this, that what the Russians were doing was state-sponsored. It was, whether it was Putin, probably Putin, his cabinet on down, they wanted them to cheat. They were putting the hole in the wall and the urine was coming through, the clean urine and all that. What Lance Armstrong did and what Marion Jones did, as despicable as they were, especially Lance Armstrong, the worst ever, just an awful human being, ruining people and just awful. It's disgusting to think about even to this day, and duping all those cancer survivors into thinking, you know, send money and everything. It's just horrible. Or those who were suffering from cancer looking to him. But what they did was go against their government. They went against the US anti-doping agency. They were not part of it. They were doing something that was forbidden by the US anti-doping agency, got caught by the US anti-doping agency and punished. Russia, RUSADA, which is a joke, and I'll say it, it's just, I mean, they got kicked out for cheating, Russian anti-doping agency, and that's kicked out. I mean, RUSADA was part of this, and that is the huge difference between what we talk about doping with the Russians, the state-sponsored systemic doping, and the awful individual cheaters from the United States.
Just to play
But let
devil's
me-
advocate.
oh,
Go ahead,
sorry.
Maya. Go ahead.
Yeah. Let me emphasize just once again, you cannot do sports in Russia at this level and not be related to state. I know many athletes who would love to, but it's impossible. I'm not saying that, you know, I'm not justifying, obviously. I mean, my position here is pretty tricky because I'm supposed to defend Russia, although I share lots of your positions and lots of your points of view. But the problem is that you cannot do sports at this level in the country if you're not state sponsored. No option. You cannot go private. There are no private swimming pools at this level. There are not, tracks or track fields or whatever. Tennis probably is the only one which is parents sponsored and then sponsor sponsored, not state sponsored. So I feel sorry for the athletes because they kind of, I don't know, I was not there, but they kind of probably had no choice, because if you want to be at this level at the Olympics, you do what you're told to do.
You know, that started in the Soviet Union and it's clearly continued. I just want to play devil's advocate, and what you mentioned something I was going to mention, Chris, and let's throw in the number 3 all-time individual cheater, who happens to be Canadian, our friend Ben Johnson. Who opened the eyes of the world. You know, the world that didn't know about doping knew about it after the Seoul Olympics. I mean, that really was, you know, we follow this stuff. We knew about, I mean, I never knew that I'd have to know so much about pharmaceuticals as I did writing about sports. But the world, most people were shocked when the Ben Johnson thing emerged. However, as Maya just said, I'm always really careful about throwing everybody into the same bucket, because, you know, yes, Russia had a massive doping program leading up to the Sochi Olympic Games, and in all sorts of other events, track and field and stuff, swimming, whatever, around that. Then that whole a second massive doping plan, which began right around the 2010s and went, who knows if it's still going on. That does not, however, mean every Russian athlete was doped, and you know, we have now evidence that Kamila Valieva took a prohibited substance. That does not mean that every one of Eteri's athletes was taking prohibited substances. Maybe they were, maybe they won't. But I'm really careful. I'm really careful about lumping everybody together. Yes, I think the punishment the IOC gave to Russia for doping was far too light. Even as I agree that it's hard to punish the rhythmic gymnast for something that the Olympic weightlifter did, but that happens. I mean, teams, I mean, in the United States, college teams have lost championships because of a cheating episode that had nothing to do with the players. So anyway, but to me, it's, Dave, you said one of the most interesting things at the beginning. Everything, as soon as you get them in the hall, particularly in figure skating, the entertainment level goes up. I mean, they're just all of the drama queens. I mean, you know, from Plushenko and Mission screaming about no quadruple jump from Lysacek, and then you come into the Eteri era, and then you got Tamara Moskvina, who's just a piece of work by herself. I mean, there is. First of all, there's the cultural element of their connection to figure skating. And secondly, that they've just got a lot of really fascinating people whom I wish I spoke Russian so I could have gotten to know them a little better.
Well,
I just wanted to add that just one short comment is that Phil mentioned that no girls are known, right? So we don't know personalities in women But pairs are still there, almost the same as you saw at the Olympics, and Tamara Mascrina is still there, although Eteri Tudberidze joined the pair field now. But you would love that, right? But it's still the names that you know, and they plan to stay, but who knows if they going to survive until the next Olympics. Sorry.
Oh, no. I think at the end, it's okay if we all, kind of interrupt each other and have a conversation. Yeah, I think the difference, though, Phil, you were saying we don't know. Absolutely. Are there Russians who are not cheating? I am sure of it. But when it is a state-sponsored program, then it forces the hand often of either all of us looking from the outside, certainly the International Olympic Committee and the international federations, to try to start weeding their way through it. For the US, USADA identified the cheaters in the US. I mean, even, going back to some of the more recent situations, USADA is the one that announces it. If USADA had made sure, they said, hey, we need Kamila Valieva's drug test stat. Mm-hmm. And they didn't, because it was Christmas Day, and they obviously February 7th was the medal, the medals, well, the finals, and then the next day, February 8th of 2022 was the medal ceremony. And if RUSADA, and I realize it's COVID and it's going to the Swedish lab because we can't trust RUSADA's lab, yeah. I get it. But if they had said and moved it along the way Sha'Carri Richardson, for example, look at that. I mean, this is pretty close to a apples to apples, where she gets tested, the US gets the result, it's marijuana, which everyone's outraged, how dare we kick someone out for marijuana? But of course it is a banned substance, which she admitted. And it's USADA saying that Sha'Carri Richardson cannot go to the Tokyo Olympics. Compare and contrast to Russia, which all of a sudden, they don't do anything. Again, COVID, different lab. I understand things can take time. Maybe it was miscommunication. And now it explodes at the Olympics. That's on RUSADA. That is RUSADA's fault to not have an answer, to have a positive drug test, and make sure Valieva doesn't even go to the Olympics. Of course, they didn't do that because they wanted Valieva at the Olympics.
Yeah, I have a question to all of you. Imagine, what's your point of view on the topic? We had Anna Sherbakova and Alexandra Trusova equally good to perform in the team event. For me, the biggest question is that why the Russian Olympic Committee and Russian Federation of Figure Skating decided to put an athlete, Kamila Valieva, to the team event with no clear result of the test, December test. They knew that it's late. They definitely should have taken care of that. At least okay, we have two other strong girls. Let's not jeopardize the team medal. For me, this is the thing I cannot possibly understand, because that's a definite mistake.
Arrogance. It's a simple arrogance, figuring, well, we've gotten away with this before, we'll get away with it again. I mean, they just were arrogant enough to think that nothing was going to happen. And the Sha'Carri Richardson case was really interesting because there was an even more pressing time period for that than there was. I mean, the Valieva thing should not have taken 6 weeks to get from December 25th to February 7th or 8th. But if it had taken a week or two, that still would have been plenty of time to disqualify her from the Olympics. They were going to name Sha'Carri to the Olympic team almost immediately. And if she was disqualified, they had to know that almost immediately. But that's not excuse. I mean, what I'm saying is I'll give RUSADA for the holidays and even the Orthodox New Year and whatever. I'll give them a little bit of slack here, but I'm not going to give them 6 weeks worth of slack. And now, of course, we're coming out to the 2-year anniversary's worth of slack. We're within 3 weeks of that now. So
right. But now, could you make the case? And again, we're guessing here, right, Maya, to your question, and which is when we asked ourselves in Beijing as this was going on. I mean, is it possible, because she was only 15 and they knew she was a protected person, right, a minor? So did they think, hey, we know, we've got the positive test, or they maybe knew, or whatever they knew or didn't know. And so we know that she's going to be cleared to compete, which she was. And once they found out, once this, exploded in Beijing, and so we know we can get away with it, to Phil's point, but even adding a little layer to that, which again shows the incredible mistake the IOC continued to make by allowing the Russians to show up. I mean, they did cut back, but they didn't have the full team, but in Rio and in Pyeongchang. And then, of course, to each Olympics, they've been able to get away with it. versus being completely punished 100%, which is tough because there would have been athletes, who would have been caught in that net that didn't deserve to be. But the flip side is, do any of the athletes from other nations who are abiding by the WADA code and not cheating, do any of those athletes deserve to go against dirty competitors from Russia? And, this, of course, is the age-old question.
Maya, Maya, you made a very good point, though. I mean, that's, it's already so long ago that I'd forgotten, of course, that you had, two other potential Olympic gold medalists on your team. Why didn't you just simply, put one of them in? At least they would have been, yeah, there might still be a problem with whatever Valieva did in the singles, but there would be no problem with if they had won the team gold medal with Sherbakova or Trusova, which they would obviously have done because they were going to beat all the other women.
Yeah.
There'd been, at least that would be one controversy that would have gone away. And I think that the other controversy might have been even a little bit diminished because there was so much else going on. But yeah, I mean, so now we're left here.
I just wanted to say that I do not agree with the version that they wanted to hide behind the minor status of Kamila. If you have a safe plan to go ahead with Trusova or Sherbakova, and the team medal is the most important one for the Russian authorities because it shows like we are overwhelmingly good in figure skating. I definitely think that they would choose they would prefer to choose the athlete that has no questions with any doping tests that have not arrived, in time. I'm sure that they just didn't think of that. And it just blows my mind because we would have been not discussing this now, probably would have been discussing Kamila's case, or probably she wouldn't even gone to the Olympics. She would have stayed at home. And for instance, Lisa Tuktamisheva would have joined the Olympic team. I don't know. But now everybody is left with a big problem, which has absolutely no perspective of being resolved in the nearest future. Do you believe it happens in February?
Well, obviously I've covered this every step of the way, including at CAS, Switzerland. There's rumors out there now online that it's resolved and that Russia, she's going to, I'm not going to say it because people can look. I've talked to my sources today and said that not yet, there's no CAS decision yet. We'll see, it's going to be one of two things, right? And they're supposed to rule at the end of January. So it's a couple of weeks. I would expect it potentially anytime. And the ruling will either be basically she's guilty or she's innocent. And then at that point, the decision goes to the International Skating Union. As you guys know, the ISU then would order the medals. They would rank, so if it's, Russia, if she's exonerated, protected person, minor, slap on the wrist, whatever. And then it would be Russia, US, and Japan. And obviously, if she is found guilty, then the ISU could decide then to move the US up to the gold, Japan to silver, and Canada to bronze. And then, of course, they throw it to the IOC. And then it's the question of how do you do this? And we know over the years, these athletes have received their medals sometimes in FedEx boxes that they open at their kitchen table, which is just so unfortunate and terrible.
I think they were promised that there will be a proper ceremony. And I think the decision deadline is February 12th, but hopefully it will be a little bit earlier. But what do you think will happen if Russia is allowed to keep the medal and then there will be this medal ceremony with Russia? Don't you think it would be tempting to try to send those medals in the FedEx boxes because it will be scandalous? I don't know, scandalous, but a little bit of booing is probably expected.
Well, I think
where are you going to do? Where would
exactly?
You say
where do you do it? You can't. If the Russians are going to be sending a limited team to Paris, the Paris organizers aren't going to want any part of that ceremony.
That's what I said, you guys. I've reported that. The IOC said absolutely no way are you going to have at the Paris Summer Olympics Russia on top when you've just kicked Russia out of those Olympics. That's a guarantee.
It's like hot potato. You don't know what to do with it.
Well,
it is a hot potato.
I think it's crystal clear that you wouldn't be doing it at the Paris Olympics. I think what you do, it's possible that each country could have their own ceremony. In other words, so then Russia could celebrate with Russia. You could also have the IOC bringing the US and Japan in to Paris, but then you're not going to have a ceremony without someone on top of the gold medal stand. And what they should have done, guys, what they should have done, obviously 2 years later, hindsight 2020, is the day that they canceled, which of course we heard about in Beijing, and then it just exploded. It was a huge, huge story. What they should have done is within a day or two realizing, oh my gosh, this thing is going to go on for a while. They should have said to Russia, we have no idea with you guys, stay home, don't do anything, or we'll give you these golds right here. Brought the ceremony, put us, at the ceremony at the plaza, whatever, and given the medals, put the medals around the neck, the silver for the US and Japan, the bronze, then the athletes have medals. And that would have taken that piece of the conversation out of this, because I think one of the reasons it's so supercharged and interesting, and people that wouldn't even know about what's going on, like people in the grocery store were like, oh yeah, I've heard about those athletes that still don't have their medals. That would have taken that away. You could have reordered it later, like they do a lot with doping, but you would then, the US would have had the silver, Japan would have had the bronze, and those athletes would have been able to go home with actual medals around their neck.
Yeah, I have one question for Maya. We talked about, why wouldn't they have sent Sherbakova or Trusova? And obviously Sherbakova, made that Olympic team by a hair. And that was rather controversial at the time. She
still winning the event, right?
Winning the event. But do we know whether or not Sherbakova or Trusova's doping tests from nationals were marked with priority or not? We know obviously that they were passed, but Valieva only failed by a trace amount. So I'm curious whether or not Trusova's or Sherbakova's tests were marked as priority, or were they marked the same as Valieva's?
What they say, and they keep saying different stuff, is that first of all, none of the Russian tests sent to Sweden, to Stockholm, were marked priority. And this actually, started the whole thing. After they realized that time is ticking and we need to do something, they contacted the lab and asked to mark them as priority. But due to COVID, understuffing and things like that, nothing actually worked the way it should be. But I'm absolutely sure that if Alexandra's and Anna's tests were late as well, we would have heard that a million times from the Russian authorities. That would have proven that the lab worked really badly, right? So I'm absolutely sure they would have, sold this as one of the things that confirmed their grounds. So I don't know, but I also wanted to ask and mention something, Christine. Russian team event figure skaters, they are also at home with an empty boxes. I do realize that it's Kamila, part of their team, being, a girl in question, doping test, positive doping test. I'm not saying anything, but I think that IOC just didn't want to deal with that in Beijing at all. They just wanted to hide behind the curtain and say, okay, not on my watch. Let that happen like in March, in April, whatever. We don't want a scandal and a podium with nobody on the top, position of the podium. So this actually resulted in a bigger mess, as we see now. But those, Russian athletes, Russian figure skaters are also at home with an empty boxes. So I don't know what happens next. Actually, I don't know if they're awarded medals, how that would happen. And also if they are asked if there are no medals for Russia, what happens to the money that they received in Russia for those medals? What happens with those boxes? I don't know. Too many questions.
Right. I think talking about potentially you just take away her points, and can they still have a silver medal, for example? So
no, it's number 4. If they take all points earned by Kamila, Russia is number 4. So Canada comes in third.
But I guess I would just say, and then Phil, please go ahead. I guess my only thought on that was, and Phil referred to this earlier, about like contaminated teams. This has happened in track and field where someone tests positive and that knocks out the whole medal. So absolutely, if the Russians, right now it's empty, those empty boxes, just like the US and Japan, which the US Figure Skating Association has made the point of, and I think it's been a good PR campaign for them to do that. Not that it's done anything, but the fact is we are talking about a Russian, so that could impact, that impacts them. So if they want to look and say, hey, we want to blame someone for not having our medal, Well, just look at Kamila Valieva and the way the Russian authorities handle it. It's easy to find out who to blame on that one.
So, well, going back now just strictly about Valieva, if we decide that the one excuse that was trumped up was like the athlete who told Don Catlin, my girlfriend was doing a study of cocaine and I tripped over the dog and landed in it, and that's why I tested positive for cocaine. I mean, the grandfather's coffee or tea or whatever, or energy drink or whatever, that clearly seems a bit on the far-fetched side. If the only issue is whether the protected person thing stands up as an adequate defense, why the bleep is it taking so long to decide it?
Well, this
Yeah.
is, yeah, go ahead, Maya.
Yeah, this is one of the reasons I don't think anybody in the Russian Olympic Committee or Federation or whatever, they were ready for this to happen. Because if they were, they would have definitely come up with a better version. Because obviously the granddad's glass is something when you panic, is something you do when you panic. So if they knew that something's wrong with the test, long from like December or beginning of January, 6 weeks, right? At least they would have called the lawyers to make up a version which is not as absurd as the granddad's glass.
The
Well,
granddad who is thousands of miles away. I mean, I think those, on the other side of Russia when that national championships took place. So
for all of those years and years and years when you heard excuses like this, they just seem to be thought up out of thin air. As you said, they would have, or the reasons why during the entire East German regime as the second most powerful sporting country in the world behind the USSR, only one elite athlete was ever caught for doping, and that was the shot putter Ilona Slepianek. Why was that? Because they so thoroughly tested athletes before they went to competition that there weren't any doped athletes on the teams. That's what I mean. In the past, I think if they, we just don't know because some people in Rusada and Russia know the facts. But if they had known that Valieva had this looming over her head, she would have suddenly have injured her hamstring or twisted an ankle or something that kept her off the team. And then they would have replaced her with Elizaveta. And in the skating world, people would have noticed, but in the general world, nobody would have noticed.
Yeah.
Well, so you asked the question about why it's taken so long. Russia, they dragged their feet for most of the year. I think we can get into the weeds about but Russia, the fact Rusada was banned, we are talking about state-sponsored doping, and it's not everyone, but this is one of the greatest cheating nations we have seen in terms of doping. I'll say it. And they have dragged this out, took it an extra year. It is absolutely unconscionable that these athletes, Russian athletes, the others who are clean, if they are, US athletes, if they're clean, which they did not fail drug tests, Japanese athletes, and then Canadian athletes have had to wait this long. And there's one reason it's happened. Russia not expediting the test, Russia putting Valieva on the team. Your point, Maya, about Valieva's doing both the short and the long in the team competition. And then, of course, Russia dragging its feet for most of the rest of 2022. We can blame one group of people for this, and that is Russia and the way they've handled this.
Well, Christine, I have a question for you about dragging feet, because this is the week of the Canadian Figure Skating Championships, and it took several days for Nikolaj Sorensen and Laurence Fournier-Baudry to withdraw from the competition after the investigation was announced into Nikolaj Sorensen for sexual assault. And I want to ask you when Skate Canada was notified, what you know about that, and do you think it has harmed the Canadian Figure Skating Championships that it took so long for them to withdraw?
Well, it wasn't announced. I was able to break that story, as you know, and I'm not saying that in an egotistical way, but the secrecy that the Canadians have enforced on the survivor of the alleged sexual assault is extraordinary. They've muzzled the survivor. Her attorney, Nancy Hogshead, Olympic gold medalist, Phil knows well. Nancy has told me in my piece that on, what was that last Thursday, that that she said that she could only say that there was an investigation and otherwise mandated secrecy. That's just appalling. And Canadian Safe Sport, the OSIC, should look at that and change that immediately. That a survivor can't have his or her own story to tell. So anyway, if there's any doubt out there for anyone who has gone through something as horrible as this, that there's value in speaking out, well, we now know there is value. And if you can be courageous, and Ashley Wagner is a wonderful example for so many people, that you can speak out. And within 5 days after we reported that, he announced his withdrawal from the national. So it is being investigated, but they've kept it a secret, and it required the courage of this wonderful survivor to come have and by the way, how those things work, Phil knows this, Amaya, you know it, and Dave, you know, it was a year of conversations. But the most important part about it was I was able to get the report, because there was no way that this survivor or even her attorney were allowed to speak and talk. And so I went other ways and went and got the report. And again, it was having the report. If you look at the way I wrote it, it's according to the report. But I do know that the heartache that these survivors go through and how hard it is to speak out. And it's amazing that the report I was able to get, and then of course from sources in the United States, and then of course that allowed me to report the story and break the story. So Canada should do a better job of having transparency and looking out for survivors.
Well, they do have the Worlds coming up in Montreal. So I wanted to ask all three of you, going into this, they were one of the top 5 ice dance teams in the world. They were certainly expected to put on a good showing there. Do you think that Nikolaj Sorensen and Laurence will be named to Canada's team for the World Championships? And should they be able to compete if the investigation is still ongoing?
It's on. Well, this is a complicated question. Obviously, all these cases are. Look at we can go back to Tonya Harding and how the U.S. Olympic Committee basically having to eat crow and allow her to skate in the Olympics because their lawyers were pathetic and Tanya's lawyers were better. But we have a case right now going on with a University of Illinois basketball player who has been criminally charged with rape. The case, it's gotten no further than that. They suspended him from the team. His attorneys are now appealing. So if Canada were, I think, they were probably advised wisely to withdraw. But if Canada were to suspend them before the investigation is completed and the investigation proves no wrongdoing on his part, they would face tremendous legal consequences. So it's awful. It's an awful situation. If this is a trillion times worse than doping and medals that aren't handed out because it's somebody's life that may have been ruined over this alleged sexual assault. But there still are some legal barriers that prevent you from just saying, well, we're going to do morally and ethically, we shouldn't let them skate, but we can't do that legally. And difficult as that is, that's part of the problem.
But Phil, and I know you feel, and I know how you feel about these things. The flip side is for someone to come forward with a report, it takes unbelievable effort when you've gone through. I'm not going to say the words here, but those 2 paragraphs from the report are the most graphic 2 paragraphs I've written in my career.
I agree with you 100%, but we also agree in this. You are in due process.
But it's a privilege, not a right, to be representing your country in figure skating. It's not a right; it's a privilege. There are organizations that make a decision every day, especially in Me Too. That's just where we are, right?
As I said, this is exponentially, you can't put enough zeros on the exponent, worse than a doping case. And somebody told them to do the right thing and withdraw. But
Yeah.
pardon me?
I was just wondering from Maya if, you know, what are people saying at the European Championships? Because so far the International Academy of Montreal, which is probably as powerful as many skating federations, has, you know, remained silent on this. Obviously, we saw, you know, Marie-France Dubreuil, Sam Chouinard, and some of the coaches like Nikolaj Sorensen's post. But, you know, what is everyone saying about this at Europeans?
Nobody is talking much about that because this is Europeans and Canada is not involved. And I think it's one of the reasons, like everybody is saying, okay, no Canada here, so let's not discuss Canada. Ice Academy of Montreal is represented here by two coaches, Romana Genauer and Giuseppe Shea, if I'm correct with the surname. Everything goes on. I mean, it's Europeans, so everybody is, you know, concentrating on European matters. So there's no discussion going on publicly or like media wise, or probably there's some conversations like at the, you know, dinner tables. Yes, I don't know, I'm not present there, but you know, nobody's discussing that much.
I mean, going back to the earlier thing I said, I would have, if it were if I were the president of Skate Canada and I had to make that decision, I would have said legal consequences be damned. They're not skating in our championships. And whether we said that or we had them say it by announcing that they were withdrawing is irrelevant. But somebody else, you know, it took a trillion times more courage for this young person to file that report than it would be to say that they can't skate. So I agree with you 1,000,000% on that. And we all know what the numbers are about how many women don't report sexual, and men too, don't report sexual assaults because they see what happens to them as they go through the courts and as they go through the court of public opinion, as they go through all this stuff. So, yeah, I mean, the right outcome was reached the wrong way. Can we say that? I mean, and you know, I think that I think that Skate Canada probably won't say anything if asked about naming them to the team. Whether they'll keep a spot open. I mean, somebody's going to have to make a decision. Yeah, normally, you know, when do you have to name them to the team? It might not be until what, 2 weeks? What's the ISU deadline? A week before, 2 weeks before?
Usually they name it right after the nationals.
But that's usually. But I mean, and everybody will know why it's happening if they don't. But they're not bound to do it that way. They're not. I mean, the ISU does not say we need to know who this is right away. And I'm not having read Canada's skating bylaws. I don't know whether it's incumbent on them to name the team as soon as nationals is over.
I think it's what you said is completely correct. It's an awful situation for many people involved, and many lives are ruined because, I mean, there is absolutely no future for Nikolaj or Lawrence in skating or shows or coaching or anything. And this poor victim, like, it's a bad case for everybody. And I think that I worry about them more than I worry about Skate Canada or some officials.
I will just say again, the allegations are so graphic, so particular, so meticulous that I have no worries about Sorensen.
No, I'm not saying. It's just that I'm saying that this whole case is awful just by definition, because it's an awful thing happening. And, you know, the things that you mentioned in the article are really hard to read, right? It's just that I wish nothing like that happened, but this is life and things like that happen.
Well, and again, we want to encourage, I know we all agree, for victims and survivors to come forward. And to me, I mean, it helps them, you know, start to move on with their life. And this is, you know, this allegation, of course, is more than 11 years old. And I mean, think of the horror of that survivor for all that time. And so, yeah,
Can I ask you a question? It's kind of, you know, does Nikolaj Sorensen have the right to protect his name and do something to prove his point of view?
Absolutely. And I've been trying. I've texted, emailed, called, voicemails, everything. I probably made 20, 25 different attempts through social media to reach him, and of course his representatives. Oh, I wanted to hear from him for the last 10, 12 days. Yep.
But
sure.
with confidentiality, can he really go into detail and speak? Because these confidentiality rules are quite substantial with the OSIC.
That's not my concern. I'm a journalist trying to get him to talk. That's, so, and that's what we do. So,
But I'm sure that was the legal advice, the first legal advice that they received, to
Right,
not speak to the media.
right, but I tried, is what I'm saying. And he is known. And the other thing, Dave, you asked a while ago about, Skate Canada and the authorities have known, well, Skate Canada told me they didn't know. But the report has been out there for several months. And so, one could make the case, I have no idea, we'll try to find out, as I continue to report on this, that were they kind of hoping that it would go away, or were they just kind of hoping to drag their feet? We know
This brings us back to Kamila's case.
You mean OCIS? You mean was OCIS trying to drag its feet too?
Well, I don't know. What I'm saying is that they have known about this for a long
well, then they get bad marks then for not expediting this investigation. Right. The same thing has gone on, obviously, with a large number of safe sport cases in the U.S. have dragged on and on and on and on. And again, none of these cases are as important as one that involves sexual assault or any other situation where whether it's imbalance of power, where a person is being taken advantage of by another person, whether it's an assault or whether it's harassment, or whether those are obviously the worst kind of cases that they have to deal with. And you'd want to get that off the books as fast as you can, within, with all due deliberation. So
unless you've got a top skater that you're hoping can just get through and you've got a Worlds in Montreal. I have no idea, but I'm throwing that out there. And I will say this too, if anyone's out there listening to us who has a story to tell, I'm here to listen. I'm easy to find. My, X, Twitter, whatever, the DMs are open. I believe you, and I would love to hear from you. And again, look at Ashley Wagner, look at her courage, look at the others who've come forward. The 13-year-old with Morgan Cipras, his career's over. And I'm not saying this is you do this to have someone's career be over. You do it to tell the truth, and you do it for yourself. And I am certainly here to listen, as I have been now for about 5 years, and very proud of that reporting.
If Canada's Safe Sport has sat on this, it is incredibly heinous, and we don't know that they have. So, but if in fact that's the case, it's beyond heinous.
Well, how about the U.S. Safe Sport? I mean, Delilah Sappenfeld's complaint was filed in August of 2020. She is still coaching at competitions because she's allowed with interim measures to coach as long as she has adult supervision. That adult supervision can be her adopted son, Larry. She still remains coaching in, U.S. pair competitions.
That's because we've created these organizations and not given them the power, the money, and the staff to work efficiently. Why that is, I'm not sure.
What's the status of Russian safe sport, Maya?
On that issue, let's look at Tara Kane, who came forward with her name. And if you didn't read the story, go back and find it. Her talking about the emotional abuse that she suffered under Delilah Sappenfeld. Terrible, not obviously not sexual abuse, but emotional mental abuse. And I call Safe Sport all the time, Dave, to ask what is going on with the Sappenfeld case. And I agree with you, Phil. Absolutely, they need more staffing, more money. It's, whatever they need. But this one defies credulity that they cannot, and she appealed it, so they had to fight that appeal, so they kind of had to stop. But this is the Tara Kane story. I just looked before we came on. It was October of 2021 that I reported that story with her amazing comments. Again, a woman, a young person coming forward to tell the truth. And she's still waiting for justice, and shame on everyone for not having been able to do this in a timely manner. And let's hope that they...
Can you explain me how all this thing work? Is this is a private organization, a state-run organization, a criminal court type organization, Safe Sport, both in the US and in Canada? Who is in charge? Who do they, report to?
They're supposed to They're supposed to be totally independent. They do get money from the U.S. Olympic Committee, just like the IOC funds gives a lot of money to WADA. In a perfect world, you would not have those conflicts of interest. What bothers me most is that creating these under pressure to do so and then making them really only window dressing is almost as bad as not having any reporting system at all.
Well,
Yeah, because it's like
that,
we have something to help, we have organizations to help, but they do not help.
well, they do. No, wait a minute. No, wait, I'll defend them. Yes. Safe Sport. If it weren't for Safe Sport, Richard Callahan would never have been suspended. He was suspended for life by Safe Sport. An arbitrator came back and gave it only 3 years. That's still significant. That is something. And Safe Sport is funded at U.S. Congress, and the Olympic world wants it, and the USOPC. They need more funding. So I'm not going to be critical or defend them. They're except for the fact that they have definitely, if you look, anyone could do this, because Safe Sport takes a beating, the U.S. Center for Safe Sport. Go to their website, look at their database, and just scroll through the hundreds of names of people who are banned. That is Safe Sport. They have done that.
Well,
Great
as
to
we
know.
wrap this up, I have 2 questions for all of you. One being Simone Biles, who I think is one of the obviously most famous reporters of sexual abuse. She also, took herself out of competition with the Twisties at the last Olympics, only to come back. How much attention and pressure do you think will be on her this summer?
Lots. She will, Phil said it earlier, right? Because she's the vocal and amazing survivor of the worst sexual abuse case in sports history and the worst scandal in Olympic history, the Larry Nassar horrors. And so she's the survivor, she's the conscience of the sport, and she's also the best ever. And then the Twisty situation and how she came back and won the bronze medal in the balance beam in Tokyo. And now, of course, coming back in a huge way the last few months. So yes, by far, just absolutely will be fascinating to see what she decides. We're presuming she's coming back and competing, how she handles that, and just being the conscience of the sport, the survivor, and the best ever. Incredible story.
I agree. She will face substantial expectations because she came back and lit the world on fire again. I mean, she didn't just come back and compete, which by itself in a sport as dangerous as gymnastics is, by itself that would have been a remarkable achievement. If she came back and was as good, or if you count the new element she's added to the sport, or better than ever.
She was on fire. Yeah.
She made it even harder on herself by being more brilliant than she was in the past. The buildup is, and she's one of, I don't want to use that NBC is, its Olympics depends on her, but she's clearly one of the stories that they hope will be a lot of fun for people to watch. And if she happens to win a gold medal or 2, so much the better. I think it's just stunning. I can't even imagine doing that if you don't have any balance issues or orientation issues. I can't imagine doing what gymnasts do in any case, and watching her do it, having overcome what she did, was just an amazing, amazing thing. She was, in my mind, unquestionably the athlete of the year in world sports last year.
Well, as we wrap up, I wanted to bring it back to figure skating. And figure skating has been in an interesting spot. We talked about the absence of the Russians. And Ilia Malinin is really the only athlete who has made significant achievements that really have had the potential to break through since the last Olympics, and they haven't. So I wanted to ask, each of you what you think Ilia Malinin would need to do in order to become a household name.
He'll need to get, I'll go back and ask this. How much of a household name was Nathan leading up to the Beijing Olympics? Pretty good sized one, because he was in a lot of their Sunday advertising and a lot of the football game advertising and whatever. But by that point, he'd won 3 world championships. So Ilia needs to move to the next step, which would be to win a world championship. And then presumably it's a lot easier to promote somebody when they've got what says world champion by their name. And then, of course, you had an even better story, which is the Hanyu Nathan competition. So that made it even easier to make that into a good story. I'm not sure, I don't know. I mean, the average world does not understand the significance of landing a quad axel. They will understand if he goes into the Olympics as the reigning world champion.
Maya, what do you think about the state of figure skating, Ilia Malinin, and how does Russia view him right now?
I just think that the world of figure skating needs Ilia Malinin, and moreover, US figure skating needs Ilia Malinin because he is dragging lots of attention that is missing. As far as I understand, the popularity of figure skating in the US has been, slowly or not slowly declining, right? So you need a personality that will bring, sponsors, viewers, TikTok, I don't know, YouTube Shorts or whatever. I think he is very good for the sports because he is a personality with some considerable achievements, doing something that nobody has done before. He definitely needs that title. I agree with you, Phil, and he is doing everything to do this season. But we need a duel. We need somebody who opposes him as Hanyu Nathan. In Russia, everybody loves him, partly because he is, Ilia Malinin and of Russian origin. And there is a temptation, and I hear that a lot, to call him our figure skater, which has nothing to do with the reality, obviously. He is loved, he is very popular, and nobody actually considers him a rival because he is in another league, I think, with his technical, content. I don't know. I hope he stays. I hope he doesn't face a mental or physical breakdown. And I hope he will be good for figure skating. As a big fan of figure skating, not like Russian team or US team or, I don't know, French team. I just want the figure skating to flourish. I want viewers. I want people. I want packed stadiums. I want arenas that are hard to get into. So I think Ilia is well needed in this sport.
Christine, do you think, as we wrap up, do you think he's harmed by being a Russian American at this point in history?
Well, Maya, you nailed it. Phil, of course, as well. I'll answer the first question you asked first, which is, what does he need to do to become a household name? And he needs to get into a time machine and go back to 1988, 84, 88, maybe 92, 94. When the TV ratings were through the roof. Of course, then they became, huge, of course, after Tanya Nancy, and the interest then for a few years. But those 88 Calgary Olympics, Phil, you remember, oh my goodness, the Battle of the Bryans, the Battle of the Carmens. I mean, those were getting 30s, 40s, ratings because, of course, there were only 3 channels. And it was also a North American time zone. So to go back in time would be the way to do it when skating was skating, when literally in 1996, men's figure skating included Rudy Galindo and Todd Eldridge at the 96 World Championships in Edmonton, went head to head with men's NCAA, March Madness, and figure skating got better TV ratings than the live NCAA men's basketball. That is a true story, and that happened in 1996. So that's why I say time machine.
Unbelievable.
I know, it's amazing. Having said that, and Phil's written much about this. We've all written and talked quite a bit about just the natural decline then from Tanya Nancy, 48.5 TV rating, 6th highest rated show in television history, the short program in Lillehammer. And of course it was going to go down, but it's really gone down. And I don't know that a man does it. I think a lot of Ilia. He's, here in the DC area. I think he's fascinating. He's an incredible athlete, and he's great on social media, that's a positive, right? To try to draw the kids in, younger people in, TikTok, Instagram, etc. That's good. That's
Teenage
really
crush.
Yeah, but it just skating US skating is just not getting the attention. It doesn't get the ratings. It's just a really, really tough time for US figure skating. And I don't know that it ever rebounds because, of course, pretty much everything is now a niche sport except the National Football League. And so even golf is going to just plummet without Tiger Woods. It already is. And so that's where we are. And
you probably didn't see this, Maya, but the TV ratings for last year's sporting events just came out. The top 50 events most watched events
seen
were
that, yeah.
all professional football games. And I think it was 93 out of 100 or 94 out of 100. And we have in our country, in the sporting world, a 20 billion pound gorilla, which is professional football, and which is gambling allied with professional football. And then everything, literally everything else is in another league below that. And as that has happened, and as people have got the ability to watch whatever they want to watch, as Chris was saying, you had 3 channels. You watched the Olympics, or else you watched some old sitcom on TV on that.
Or you read a book.
You read a book. My God. There's just too much competition now for a sport like figure skating ever to come back organically.
And even if we had Michelle Kwan show up now, of course,
Wouldn't make
Michelle
enough difference.
it would, I mean, it would be bigger. A woman is going to be bigger in figure skating in the US than a man. I generally just, again, just, kind of
Historically, yeah.
Yeah. But now, I mean, again, with all the, there's just too much going on to take everyone's attention, and the US women not being a factor at all now, basically since, the last Olympic medal was 2006 for a US woman, and only 2 world medals between 2006 and now, which was Ashley Wagner silver in 2016, and then Alyssa Liu. In the worlds after the Olympics, which of course are bronze. But the Ashley's was a big one for sure. And but other than that, so if you don't, it's just a absolute dearth of medals and opportunities to be on the podium. And most countries, Russia, US, you want winners. You want to cheer for people who are winning. And the US figure skating, other than Ilia, who is terrific, absolutely fantastic. But will he move the needle like a woman skater would? And I think the answer, we all agree, would be is no on that. And that's unfortunate, because skating is a wonderful sport.
I think that with the proper, sorry.
No, Dave, if next time you go to a play in New York City, ask the 30 people around you who Nathan Chen is. See if anybody will know.
I will try that.
That's why Ilia needs a different type of marketing. Not as a figure skater, but like as a teenage crush, K-pop star, something like that. That could bring the audience that would never switch on TV or YouTube for figure skating. This is my biggest hope, that if they change the rules of, marketing and presenting him, not as a figure skater, but, oh, look, such a cute guy. Oh, he skates. I don't understand skating, but he's cute. Probably.
Well, and I think and to the point you've made and Phil made too, once we're actually moving towards the 2026 Winter Olympics, which will be what, 2 years and 1 month from now, then yes, will there be buzz? Sure. Will there be attention? Phil, you mentioned the promos. Absolutely. Assuming, knock on wood, of course, that he continues to skate great and is healthy and everything is good with him. He's a great story. It's just a very different world than those Olympic Games in the 80s and 90s that we were lucky enough to cover, and that were just through the roof. And that just can't happen again.
But I think
Russia has exactly what United States had 20 or say 30 years ago.
Right.
Russian figure skaters are so big, they do not need to continue their career, because television channels, I don't know, they're ambassadors for some brands. They're so popular, they do not need to continue skating. They are covered for life, if we're talking about money and publicity and, everything else. So we're kind of experiencing the same as you have 30 years ago.
Maya, when you bump into Ari Zakarian at the European Championships, and I'm sure he's there, you should pass on your ideas, because actually the Ilia that we saw in the press conference prior to Skate America, he was so much more open, so much more entertaining, so much more fun just to listen to that he was, and actually grown up to have more insights than he was a year ago. You're right. He's the perfect TikTok hero. I mean, look at what happened to Elaj Balde. Who, because of the power, and he started this all on his own because of the power of TikTok and Instagram. Look at how now again, is he a worldwide name? No, but he went from an unknown even in his own sport to now he's every show that does a show wants Elaj to be in there, and that's great. because he's great. But you're right. I mean, you should, and when you tell Ari, you make sure you get a deal for a cut of all of Ilia's sponsorships.
Well, thank you everyone this is a fascinating conversation. We'll have a lot to talk about this year. Thank you all much for coming on the show.
Thank you, Dave. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Dave.
It was an honor. Thank you so much for having me.